أن لا
Welcome to our podcast, where we talk about the interesting, frustrating, and inspiring experiences we have as people with strongly held religious views working in corporate IT. We're not here to preach or teach you our religion. We're here to explore ways we make our career as IT professionals mesh, or at least not conflict, with our religious life. This is Technically Religious. The way religion is often portrayed in sci-fi can be the worst of straw men. Often, it seems like they're crayon sketches of religion drawn by someone with very little knowledge of an actual religion. Pediatric theology canonized into a sci-fi framework meant from the start to highlight a preconceived set of flaws. Does our enjoyment as geeks and as sci-fi aficionados of these stories unwittingly undermine our potential enjoyment of religion and religious experiences? Or, as IT folks with a strong connection to an organized faith system, do we have an opportunity to point out these flaws and help others see them as such, and possibly help them build an appreciation of real religion in the process? I'm Leonardo, and I'd like to welcome two new voices to the Technically Religious Pantheon. First up is Justin Deering.
Hello.
And next up is Jason Carrier.
Great to be here.
Okay, so as is our wont here at Technically Religious, we're going to start off with some shameless self-promotion of guests and everything that you're doing. Justin, why don't you start us off? Tell us who you are and a little bit about yourself.
So I'm Justin Deering. I'm a senior consultant at Nudesic. I'm basically a mostly .NET developer who actually likes writing SQL. I am Zippy1981 on the I am Zippy1981 on the Twitters because I am old, not quite as old as Leon, and I identify as Roman Catholic.
Very good. Okay, how about you, Jason?
Hi, my name is Jason Carrier. I'm a product manager at SolarWinds and also a freelance product consultant. You can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn. All the other social medias are pretty worthless personally. On Twitter, I am network_carrier, and LinkedIn, you can just look me up by my name. And I would consider myself a self-styled Buddhist.
Fantastic. All right, and circling back, I am Leonardo. I'm a head geek. Yes, that's actually my job title at SolarWinds. It's not solar or wind because naming things is hard, apparently. You can find me on the Twitters, which I say just to horrify Keith Townsend's daughter. You can find me there at Leonardo. You can also find me pontificating on things both technical and religious at www.adatosystems.com. And I identify as an Orthodox Jew, and sometimes my rabbi lets me do so. So I want to dive into this conversation. Starting off, from the premise, is that really what you think? And what I mean by that is that when I'm watching certain shows, and I'm specifically thinking about things like certainly anything by Neil Gaiman, American Gods, Good Omens, I really desperately hope that Neil Gaiman doesn't think that's what we religious people think, as far as what religion is. I categorize it all, or most of it, as what I call pediatric theology. What I mean by that is somebody who is a grown-up. They might have an engineering degree. They understand how load-bearing walls and weight works and things like that, but their religious education stopped in third grade, and therefore they find themselves arguing, "That's stupid. You can't fit that many animals in a boat. They would never be able to," which is ridiculous, not just because the question itself is a little bit weird, but also because there are thousands of years of commentary from, all the way back to the Middle Ages where they said, just all the birds I know about wouldn't fit on a boat that size. Of course, those dimensions don't work. Obviously, there's something else we're talking about here. My point being that somebody's, we'll say, real-world physical education has proceeded into their adulthood, but their religious education stopped in second grade and never went any further, but they're still trying to argue religion using that understanding. It seems like that's part of what sci-fi is trying to do. I don't know what you think about it.
I was gonna say, I think it's important to start with the differences between what is a religion, what's your worldview, and kind of your attitude towards spirituality. Those things are kind of three distinct characteristics. So I would define them. I think it's important for our conversation to go through and define those words, right? And what do we mean
Absolutely.
by those? So to me, religion is all that set of kind of habits that you go through, and the different ceremonies, the different holidays that you have, that kind of thing. That's the religion. But then the worldview is kind of, how do you think that reality works? Is there planets going around the sun, or is the sun going around the planets? That kind of thing. That's kind of overall worldview. And then there's also the element of spirituality. Is how do you think the unseen works? Is there something working behind the scenes? How does that work? Is it karma? Is it heaven? Is it hell? Is it what's the paradigm of the unseen that you ascribe to?
Got it. Justin, what's your take on that?
Yeah. So okay, I think Jason raised some good points, but I think another thing to keep in mind is some people who actually are profess their religion and do try to be spiritual also do have this pediatric theology. That they believe that all the animals are both, not just because they're fundamentalists or whatever. They just haven't really delved deep into it at all.
Right. That
And
was
they're religious.
that was what they learned, and it was good enough for them, in the same way that some people stop learning math when they can balance their checkbook. And some people stop even before that and think that it's okay just to take what the bank statement says as gospel truth. So, right, I think that's true. And circling it back to sci-fi, I think the challenge with religion as it's portrayed in sci-fi and fantasy is that I think it does a disservice to the consumer, to the reader. In the sense that, first of all, I always think that a richer, more detailed world makes for a better story. So when you give religion in your story short shrift, you are giving the story short shrift in a way. Also, I think that a lot of sci-fi and fantasy writers find religion, this straw man religion, to be a really good antagonist. But if you start really fleshing out the religion, it stops being as good an antagonist. When you start to understand that there are reasons and background and underpinnings, suddenly it's not this, totalitarian authoritarian regime instituting the religious will of the, that kind of, you can't do that once you recognize that there's a, 4,000 or 5,000 year history behind it.
Yeah, the fun part there is, which part of the 4,000 or 5,000 year history are you going to represent in your characterization of the religion? Because that's kind of what they're doing in sci-fi in a lot of ways, is characterizing religions. It's definitely a reductionist view of it, but I would argue that there's still value necessarily to the reductionist view. You don't necessarily need a story to be true in order to derive some value from it. You can kind of get the lesson from it and apply that lesson in your present moment to make a better decision. Maybe it's a value judgment of what's good, what's bad that you could draw from Star Wars, for example, and see only the Sith deal in absolutes. So as a person in the world, I'm not going to deal in absolutes either, because I don't want to be like the Sith. That'd be a really simplistic example.
I like that. Don't be like the Sith, Bobby.
But I want lightning.
Right.
Keep my kids in line.
Right. That would definitely. Okay. First of all, I've seen you do enough home repair videos that you have lightning when you need it. You certainly have enough firepower in your garage to do that. But that's a whole other conversation. Okay, I see what you're saying. I think that the potential damage, is that for people who are consuming fantasy and sci-fi, where religion is, again, poorly represented, the risk is that they will turn to the real religion in their lives, in the world, and they will draw equivalency. They will say the Catholic Church is stupid in the same way that what was that movie with the gun kata, and it was another one of those dystopian movies where the church ran everything and everyone took their happy pill to not be angry and stay calm all the time, and
with Keanu Reeves.
What?
With Keanu Reeves, I don't remember the name of it.
It wasn't.
No,
it wasn't Keanu. It wasn't Keanu Reeves. I'm trying to remember who even starred in it. But anyway, not important. If I can find it, I'll put it in the show notes after. But the point is that religion was the opiate of the masses. It was that sort of line. And, the people who were calm had found a sort of inner strength. And it wasn't that religion was good. It was that religion had been subverted to become the means of control. And I think that people seeing a story like that and then going to church or going to synagogue or whatever may bristle, especially, again, going back to the pediatric theology. If you don't know any more than what you learned in second grade, it's really easy then to see the evil empire, in taking communion or something like that. I mean, like it leads to really bad, it leads to really bad sort of mental jumps, which drive people away from a religion where they might find some fulfillment if they had taken the time to maybe learn more. I guess that's really my concern about it.
I could definitely see your point. I think it's two sides to the same coin. There's good things that can happen and there's bad things that can happen, right? And it's all devils in the details kind of differences. How well is the story told, and when is that parable being applied and to what situation, right? So the outcome isn't going to always be good or always be bad, which kind of goes back to the whole only the Sith deal in absolutes, right? It's only gonna it's gonna really depend on all the variables of your situation, right?
Got it.
The movie that we're talking about, I think, is Equilibrium.
Yes.
Christian Bale.
Yes.
Yeah, there we go.
That's it. Okay, thank you. Oh, my Googler on the side. Fantastic. I want to pick up on something
Google Food's important.
That Jason, that you mentioned earlier, which was the reductionism, and so that takes us to the second sort of major talking point in this particular episode, which is what I'm calling reductionism on parade. Where are there examples where a religion has been reduced, possibly past its worthiness. And the two examples that I've got, first is Orson Scott Card's Seventh Son series. This was a series that he clearly wrote to try to provide a fantasy structure to Mormonism in the same way, and this is my other example, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is a fantasy structure to Christianity overall. So the Seven Son series has a primary protagonist named John Smith, and he is a maker, a seventh son of a seventh son, and all along the series you end up with things like a golden plowhead that has self-will and wants to plow dirt, but only the right kind of dirt. And you have the foundations of a crystal city that is made out of crystallized water, and you have all sorts of other things. You have these elements of Mormon, I'm going to say mythology. I don't mean it as myth. I mean it just as the underlying structure of the Mormon religion. So you have that, but it does a disservice, I think, to Mormonism overall, because it doesn't do a good job of telling the story of the seventh son, and it also doesn't do a good job of telling the story of Mormonism. And that takes me to the other example I have, which is The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, which I have affectionately or in an annoyed voice called Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe blunt force Catholic trauma. Because it's just this, you're reading the story and all of a sudden there's this mace coming from off the side that bashes you over the head. Whang! Look, Aslan is Jesus. Whang! Look, it's Mary. Whang! He died on the cross. Whang! It's like, I get it. And it ends up being a really bad fantasy story, and really, I feel, not a particularly wonderful introduction to Christian ideals. I don't know. I may not be the best judge of it, though.
I will say I had a roommate in college whose father was a director of religious education in the Catholic Church, and he did not he did not stick with Catholicism, and he very much agrees with your assessment. And I would say even I do agree it is very heavy-handed Christianity, but it is a children's book, and part of that is. When I read Token as a kid, I kind of knew there was some kind of Christian allegory in there, but I think it was more obvious. And I guess maybe from it was meant to be childlike and pediatric because, there was a tweet I think that best summarized it. Where C.S. Lewis would be like, oh, and now the Norse, the Norse God of War and Santa Claus are going to join the battle, and Token is like, here's this axe that's 2,000 years old. I'm going to tell you the entire history of. and we're just gonna, and he's just, that's just the axe he has, you know.
Right.
You know,
Is the axe Protestantism? No, it's an axe. It's
an axe.
Right. I actually, having read Tolkien, Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and things like that multiple times, I know that Tolkien had a religious point of view. I don't feel it. I certainly don't feel it as aggressively as Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. And you're right. It is a children's story. So I can't always... That's the reverse of pediatric theology, where you come to a children's story and you say, well, that's ridiculous. The gingerbread man could never walk. I mean, he's made of gingerbread. Where would his sinews be? Where would his... Okay, you're overthinking it, Leon. You're really, really overthinking it. So, there's that too. But I didn't get the religious overlay in Tolkien as much as I get in certainly other things. Okay, so what are some other examples of reductionism, and why or why not, if any?
So one of the ones that I would look at is in Game of Thrones, for example. They kind of have in the old school world that's there sort of a parallel to the pagan religions of Earth, and then in their new religion that's the more predominant in the kind of series where they're talking about the mother and the father, and kind of those sort of tropes sort of speak more to a Christian mythos a little bit, and the play between those two I thought was pretty well woven into the story. Sort of how the older folks would remember kind of the old gods that were more based on trees and fairies and that kind of thing, paralleling the pagan religions, and then the newer ones were kind of looking more like the Christian type deities.
Got it. So before we go to the other side of reductionism, where we think that sci-fi stories and fantasy stories have gotten it right, I want to take a stop. Jason, when we were prepping for this, you said something really interesting about sometimes what I'm calling the void can fill the void, meaning space and sci-fi and fantasy, the void, can fill a void, a lack of religion in people's lives. And I wanted you to sort of expand on that for a minute.
Sure. So particularly in America, I want to say it's like 30%, 35% right in there. Folks don't even go to church. They don't have any sort of religious view. So that's not to say that they're agnostic or atheist, but in a lot of cases, they just don't have an opinion. It's not something that they consider. So seeing a way to I think there's value in sci-fi and how religious philosophy is sort of characterized in there for the uninformed, because it sort of helps to give them some level of exposure there. And I know that's a different perspective than the one that you're coming from, and I think the important thing to recognize there is the perspective that you're coming from is a well-educated Jewish person, right? So someone who really understands the ins and outs of that faith relative to the uninitiated, and so that uninitiated person can really get a lot of value from the parable nature of the sci-fi or of the religion that's represented in sci-fi.
Got it. So that would speak more to like the spirituality of that you were talking about earlier. That sci-fi, I'm using air quotes here, sci-fi quote unquote religion, but the philosophy of it could fill in terms of a set of morals, or the idea that you should have a set of morals. You should have a set of ways to determine difficult ethical questions. You should think about these things beyond their immediate. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, so essentially the sci-fi can drive them to think through those problems, whereas maybe they wouldn't have before. So considering those moral paradoxes and coming up with their own sense of morality off the example that they're seeing in the screen.
Got it.
Or book.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you were rejected Christianity or Judaism or whatever, and you were not given a framework in that which you could be a good person because of a failing of the religion that brought you up, or you just weren't brought up with one, and you end up watch Star Trek and then you decide to become a humanist or a transhumanist. You sit there and you could go really deep into kind of some of the underpinning philosophies, and there's some values, there's things I don't agree with, but there's a solid philosophical and spiritual thing there for you to go at.
In the absence of anything else, it certainly, I think, can serve a purpose. Jason, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, I was just going to say, Captain Picard is a good leader, whether you believe the Klingons are real or not.
Okay. Fair, and I have been known to use the question of whether Darth Vader truly repented or not as part of a Jewish context conversation. It was more whether or not Darth Vader performed what would be halachically or Jewish in the Jewish religious structure, whether he really performed true repentance or not based on that structure. So we're still back to the structured dogmatic thing, and whether or not the sci-fi character could have done it. So it certainly does serve a purpose. At the same time, I do want to call out a particular risk in using sci-fi, science fiction, as a filler for a religious philosophy or a religious framework, and that's the science part. One of the great rabbis of this era, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, who recently passed away. He was the chief rabbi of England. He had a book called The Great Partnership, and it was a treatise on why science and religion both need to work together. It was against the idea that science and religion are contradictory in any way. And some of the thoughts that he brought up that I thought are relevant here is, first of all, science takes things apart to see how they work. Religion puts things together to see what they mean. And, that they serve two different purposes. But then he went and said, here's the problem. When you treat impersonal phenomena, meaning science, as if they're persons, you end up with myth. Light comes from the sun god, rain comes from the sky god, and so on. But when you treat persons impersonally, when you treat people like they're things, as if they were objects, the result is dehumanization. You categorize people by color, class, creed, and you treat them differently because of that. And so they work together, and the risk, I think, in using science fiction as your basis for a religious, moral, or ethical point of view is that the science is going to the science of the science fiction is going to outweigh the philosophy, religion, and again, that putting together, that interpersonal piece of it. And you're going to end up with a poor substitute. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I could definitely see your point. I wouldn't disagree that would happen in some cases. I just think that there's both cases that are represented. Obviously, if somebody were looking at a sci-fi and taking that as their source of absolute truth and thinking that that was really a true definition of reality, I think that would be a very different thing than looking at it, analyzing it, thinking it through, and trying to find where they could draw value from it. But I really liked the point that you made about science and religion needing to work together. That's actually one of the things that drew me to Buddhism in the first place was that when science has a better understanding of something, Buddhism adjusts. It doesn't portray itself as the purveyor of absolute truth, which was something that really, really appealed to me.
Got it.
Yeah, and I'll say, as a Catholic, people like to talk about Galileo, and I won't get into the politics of then, but it's basically more of a reject. They just said, hold off on teaching that until we, figure some stuff out. But nowadays, the Catholic Church has a big telescope in I think Arizona. It's called the Lucifer Telescope, run by the Jesuits. And
wait.
Yes,
it's called
real.
The what?
Yes, Lucifer. Yes, it's called Lucifer. Yes.
I presume not after the Marvel and TV show character, but instead.
Jesuits have a sense of humor. Yes. I
yes.
guess. But and they do that, and they say, they talk about how the Christmas probably Jesus wasn't probably born on the 25th. He was probably born in March because of the sheep were probably giving birth. That's why they were laying in the field and what have and we there is I think most modern at least my religion we do try to take science into account there, and I think other religions too, and I think some shows do get that right. I think maybe like DS9 did.
Right, and that takes us. So that takes us into the next section, which is which stories do we think really get it right? And I'm gonna start off. I've got a couple of things that I think really did well. First of all, not a lot of people now know about Catherine Kerr's Deryni series, Deryni spelled DerYni, and it'll be in the show notes. She did a really good job of portraying a medieval or sort of slightly pre-Renaissance Catholicism to and putting it in a fantasy context. So it really, really, really is Catholicism. It really is Christianity. They're not trying to make it some fake something else. But it exists in parallel with, her fantasy construct. And she does a really good job of talking about how a religious sensibility informs the users of, we'll call it magic. It's not, but whatever. And how it informs the world. So that's the first one. I also actually liked the spirituality of Madeleine L'Engle's Wrinkle in Time series. I thought she got, even though there were no specific, what we would call traditional or structured religious elements in there, she really gave a sense of the scope of the universe and, Jason, to your point, how the unseen works behind the scenes. She gave a sense that there is larger forces and larger ideals at play. And the last one, a lot of people say, well, there's no like Orthodox Jewish, fantasy stories. There is one that I know of. It's called The Red Magician by Lisa Goldstein. And it takes place in a Hungarian village. It takes place in an Orthodox Jewish Hungarian village. And Judaism doesn't figure into the story at all. The characters just all happen to be Orthodox. And the last one is actually a comic book. It's called How Mirka Got Her Sword, which bills itself as just another story about a 12-year-old troll-fighting Orthodox Jewish girl. So it's just, again, it takes place in an Orthodox context where the Orthodox Judaism it isn't a pivotal element. It just is present as another aspect of the world building that the writers do. So those are ones that do well. And again, I think they did it well because the religion wasn't the pivotal element of it. It was simply a facet that informs the lives of the characters as they go along, for better or for worse, but it informs their lives. So what else do you have to add to my list?
I'll say, two examples. So basically what I like to call the two space station series of the 90s, Babylon 5 and Deep Space Nine. Mm-hmm. So JMS and Ronald D. Moore, I think they're both atheists. I think JMS, basically said, I'm an atheist, but religion exists. And, from I think episode 2, it was all the species had to talk about their dominant religion and the Earth did is he had them shake hands with the Orthodox Jew rabbi and the Greek Orthodox and rabbi and the Catholic, the Greek Orthodox priest and the Protestant minister and the African whatever. It built onto the idea of the humans being the people that brought diversity together, and that's how they went and defeated the shadows. Down down the whatever. So I thought that was he did a lot of stuff that was they had a group of Catholic, or they seemed Catholic brothers come on, and it seemed to be like how a monkish order would evolve, where they had a certain mission, and they kind of worked in a very Franciscan way of being, they did work in exchange for lodging and things like that. And I think Deep Space Nine. I think the whole wormhole, the idea of exploring the idea of, well, what if who we thought were gods? Well, they're these people, and they just exist outside of time in this wormhole, and then we have this kind of doubting Thomas, guy who becomes their emissary, and I think that dealt with it well. Their Pope, their Pope being she was upset that she never had her divine experience. She was upset like that, and she was also really evil. Not because she didn't have, but she was, and I think they dealt with I think they dealt with stuff very well. There was the one episode where Kiko was the teacher, and she was teaching about basically I guess she was teaching about the Earth going around the sun or whatever, and they're saying we don't believe that because of the prophets taught us this or what have you, and they had that actual debate between fundamentalists and non fundamentalists there.
Got it.
Okay, so I've got, I guess I could have several Star Wars rants, but I have one in the religious aspect of. So did anyone have any idea that the Jedi was supposed to be celibate until halfway through episode 2? If they if they not even George Lucas. I think he was writing the script and but and I think that was one of the things it's hard to talk about categorizing the celibate, or I mean the Jedi as like a monkish order or whatever. Is it realistic or not realistic? Maybe a lot of it was like Buddhist, and you might have more to say in that Jason. But the other thing is like, there's big thing about the celibacy. If you're going to become a priest in the Catholic Church, there's a lot of preparation talking about the celibacy and stuff.
Right. They don't just spring it on you like the day before you take your
Yoda,
vows. Like, oh, and by the way.
And the last bishop on Earth living in the swamp would not forget to mention that to where Luke went had a family in the old canon.
Yeah, I got from the so fair warning, I did see Phantom Menace in the theater, and then I refused to see anything else of the prequels. I actually frequently will not admit that they even existed. So just take that for what it's worth. I did try to watch the second one. Yeah, I tried to watch the second one on mute while I was running on a treadmill without subtitles, and I still found it unwatchable. So that's just my own diatribe against the prequels. But my point being is that I got the sense of not being connected, that sort of almost Buddhist sense of not, being attached to no thing.
Yeah.
But I did, right. Like, I didn't get the same sense that meant celibacy. It just meant you have to make sure that you are ready, you are mature enough not to feel ownership or attachment to another person as much as to your, lightsaber or your starship or your Wookiee or whatever.
Yeah, they did. I mean, the Clone Wars does. He's supposed to they were afraid if he can become too attached to, Padawan, and you're going to be too attached to R2, and there definitely was that there, and I guess in that regard it's a good thing. I just I felt like there was a lot of inconsistency for me to formally judge Star Wars because it's so inconsistent, where I can say
right. I mean, again, sci-fi story. To Jason's point, there are parts that work and parts that don't work, and
Yeah.
Okay, I think we have talked this one not quite to death, but good enough for one episode. Lightning round, final words. Any final thoughts or ideas? Justin, I'll let you lead this one off.
Okay, sure. I think this was the great conversation. I think thank you, Jason, for giving the Buddhist perspective, and I think I will echo your points about the creation myth stories. Those are good, and that was probably the least tough read part of the Silmarillion. Who's it's kind of a very academic and tough read as a Tolkien fan. It's the hardest one of them all to read.
Got it. Okay, Jason.
Yes, I would love to talk about the concept of a helpful way of thinking. It's something that I took from Da Vinci Code books, Dan Brown books. There was a Buddhist character in the book that talked about a helpful way of thinking. Now, she's a very scientific-minded person, right? So she's very much about physics and reality, and doesn't care much for winged angels, that type of thing. But she really liked the concept of if you could look at Christianity and see something that was very helpful to you, even if you don't think of it as literal truth, it can still be extremely helpful and impactful in your life. I apply the same thing to Star Wars, and as I'm watching religions in sci-fi, a lot of times they can give you a different perspective on a truth, even if it's not speaking to like an absolute truth. It's a pattern that can be a helpful way of thinking in your life.
Got it. So, you're not talking about actually recreating the Jedi religion. You're just saying that this thing that they do, even though it's from a fantasy environment, is useful and applicable to our real world experience here.
Exactly. Looking at it allegorically instead of literally.
All right. So I want to wrap it up on a completely different aspect. I've already waxed annoyed on the whole Star Wars universe thing. My final thought is that there's a certain moment in the TV series Firefly where River gets a hold of books, book.
Shepherd books.
Yeah, his Bible, and reorders it. And says, it was completely out of order, so I put it in the right order. And of course, he's like, you completely ruined it. You messed it up. And she's like, but it was wrong. It was in the wrong, the references and whatever. And I just want to wrap that character. I want to wrap River in a big hug, and I want to bring her into like a yeshiva, and I want to show her the Talmud and say, "Here, go." Off you go. And let her, because that's the kind of mind, the one that says, well, but your reference points, that this came before that and that comes before this. And if you did this and this and that is exactly the mindset of a good yeshiva bacher, of a good learner, somebody who is able to take information that is often presented out of order or in a different context and say, but wait a minute, you said this other thing 4 books ago. What about that? That is exactly the kind of mind. And I just, that one moment, and of course, books, reaction of horror, and you don't get religion. And I'm thinking, no, she does. She's perfect for it. You just need to, and that didn't happen. So that would be my change, my headcanon change to the Firefly universe. Plus the fact that Wash never died. That would also be my change. So, all right. Well, I appreciate both of you taking some time out of your busy lives to talk today. And I hope that you won't be strangers on Technically Religious in the future.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Leon. I really appreciate you having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks for making time for us this week. To hear more of Technically Religious, visit our website, technicallyreligious.com, where you can find our other episodes, leave us ideas for future discussions, and connect with us on social media.